So this is the Annunciation Triptych, aka the Marode altarpiece, which is attributed to an artist named Robert Campin, but oftentimes it'll just be said it's attributed to the workshop of Robert Campin in the early 15th century, so 1400s there. And so we think maybe he did this piece along with some apprentices who worked in his workshop. Beautiful art piece, great example of the typical Northern Renaissance symbolism and detail and just all around awesomeness, honestly. Love some Northern Renaissance altars. So let's take a look and talk about some vocab and content context. So context, first of all, this would be made for someone's home for private worship. And most likely it was an upper middle class, husband-wife team, we think in this particular case, or family, because the area where we are, which is Northern Europe, specifically a place called Flanders, which is, think of like Northern Belgium, the Netherlands area, they had this new type of kind of economic environment that was based on business. Merchants and the trading industry and the merchants who are able to grow their businesses is a strong, contextual piece of information, because more people than just the church or the wealthy, church patrons or wealthy, powerful patrons have the ability to purchase art. So that's going to change what kind of art is being made. So in this case, with this particular piece, you have more private, personal religious art being made. So that's one important piece of context that you need to have. So that also impacts the artists, because then they start making art pieces even before necessarily that they get a patron who's going to purchase it. So in this particular instance, we think the center panel was painted. Then the patron came in and said they would like an altarpiece. Then the left-hand panel was added and a right-hand panel was added to the piece to be more specific to the particular patron. I already talked about Campin's workshop. Campin is the main artist, and then maybe he had other apprentices, like 2 or so other artists working to paint this and complete it as well. We're in the Northern Renaissance era, and in the Northern Renaissance pieces, we are going to be talking a lot about setting religious stories, which definitely did not take place in like a Flanders and a Belgium or a France or any of these more European areas. But we're going to place those stories in the areas so that they become very relatable to the public. So you'll notice that the homes that the Virgin Mary and Joseph and other religious figures are in are very much the upper middle class domestic settings and or places that would be found in the north during the 1400s. So that's one in the outdoor setting, and what you're going to see is typical of that particular time and place as well. So again, it makes the stories relatable. And then another very important piece of context is going to be oil painting. We're no longer using tempera paints here or just natural pigments. We have now introduced in Flanders oil painting. Color and paint that is more vibrant, reflective, and takes longer to dry, so you could do a little bit more with. So oil painting originates in the Northern Renaissance, and then it will move its way down into Italy in the next pieces we talk about with the Italian Renaissance. Okay, so let's take a talking about now content. So I have the image below, and the first thing we need to talk about is triptych. So TRI for 3, it's a 3-paneled art piece. And the 2 outer panels that are less wide, you can shut those in the middle. They meet in the middle, and then you have just a simple, smaller, square art piece that you could carry around and move. So these personal art pieces are going to be smaller, kind of like that idea of art mobilier, and you can bring them out or move them around as your need requires. So the center panel typically is the most important panel with the most important theme, and the two outer panels then relate and are slightly less important. I'm going to be talking a little bit when we get closer up to the images, the medieval influence. When you're in the North in the Renaissance, you have such rich medieval art around you. You have Gothic cathedrals, Romanesque cathedrals, but primarily like Gothic cathedrals around. And that heritage is very strong. And so you will see, even though we're in the Renaissance, in the Northern Renaissance, we're going to still pay tribute and utilize some medieval characteristics. Our figures are not going to look quite as realistic in some ways than our Italian Renaissance pieces and figures will look. Lots of symbolism in the Northern Renaissance, and I'm going to get specific about what some of these objects symbolize. And speaking of, there are so many objects in these Northern Renaissance triptychs and altarpieces for private worship because they didn't want you to get bored. If you had this out every day, you might get bored if it was just a couple of figures and objects. So let's populate it with a ton of stuff. Therefore, your interest will be maintained for a longer period of time. You'll really always find something new to look at and detail to see. Northern Renaissance art is very detailed and incredibly specific. Our figures are very humanized. Remember, humanized is a term we've talked about in Greek art, where you focus on the human experience. And so if you'll notice, looking right now at the Virgin Mary in the center, no halo, and the angel, no halo, even though, yes, the angel does have wings, but no halos in this. And so that is a new and important change in religious art that you see in the Renaissance. Perspective in Northern Renaissance art is not realistic. And again, that's carryover from the Middle Ages. I will show you that in specific. And the drapery is not as realistic. It is far more, especially in this piece, far more energetic, dramatic, and far more, I think, abstract kind of feeling than it is in Italy. So let's take a look at the panels. So the left-hand panel are your donors. So this was added on after the center panel was done, before there was even a patron. You have the donor, a husband and wife, kneeling, so definitely showing their respect, their devotion, their pious kind of faith there, and they're outside the center room. They're outside in looking in the door. And inside the room that they're looking in is this Annunciation scene that I'm about ready to show you. So it's showing their respect. It's showing their importance because they're included in the image. And it's showing possibly that their new marriage, that they want to have children in the future. So it could be that as well. They are inside a walled garden, which you can see. And the walled garden may be a symbol of Mary, the Virgin Mary's virginity. And it's an unspoiled, garden there. The guy in the back at the door leading out to the city is like a town messenger. He's opening the door there, and you can see a little bit of the town with the great detail in that left-hand image, the closer image. I wanted to put that there so you could see just all the individual hairs, the detail in the flowers, the ring on the husband's finger, just the detail in the buildings and the bricks. It's just an incredible amount of attention to detail here in Northern Renaissance works. So they are the witnesses to the Annunciation, and this was painted after they then became associated with the piece and decided to purchase it from the workshop of Robert Campen. Now the center panel is that Annunciation, and remember the Annunciation scene is when you have the angel Gabriel. Angels are messengers of God. So the angel Gabriel, who's telling the Virgin Mary, who's sitting there in red reading her book, or most likely Bible, she is going to be the mother of Jesus. So that's the main story here. And I pointed out just the medieval architectural details, the trifoil images or detail in the little niche and on the pew or bench that the Virgin Mary is kneeling on. And then I also wanted just to talk about quickly all of the symbolism, because Northern Renaissance art is, again, rich in symbolism. The brass kettle in the background niche, a symbol of the Virgin Mary's purity. The lily flowers on the table, a symbol of the Virgin Mary, yet also a symbol of the resurrection of Jesus, his rebirth. The extinguished candle that is also on the table, the smoke coming from that candle, could be a symbol of the Holy Spirit and of Jesus becoming then, the incarnation of Jesus. The fireplace to the right, a symbol of hell, and the Virgin Mary and then Jesus are protecting you from that. His birth, ultimately his crucifixion and resurrection then becomes that barrier, and faith in Jesus and God, the barrier for you to hell, that protective barrier. And the other thing just to look at is just the perspective and the space. The space is incredibly small in terms of its, the proportion of the space of the interior versus the figures of Gabriel and the Virgin Mary. The two individuals are way bigger than they really should be, considering the space. The table is tilted, and so the things should be sliding off the table, but we want to see everything. That's the purpose. Realism isn't quite as important. Again, it's that medieval carryover of get the message, get the message across and the symbolism across. And then up in the, kind of hidden by my arrow, but by the windows, and I have the image up on top here, you have Jesus flying in through the window with the cross, making his way, to his mother-to-be, which is the Virgin Mary. And that light there, where her knee is kind of poking out, that light in her drapery, that's the moment of conception. That's where she then just is impregnated by the Holy Spirit, and then she becomes the mother of the Son of God. So that there's going on in the center, and then the drapery, you can just see it really clearly here, the dramatic folds, the energy. It's much more detailed, much more of kind of an energetic presentation of drapery versus the natural way it would fold in a more classical scene. And then there's some close-ups for you so you can see just the attention to detail is spectacular. The shadows painted on the walls. That is the beauty really of Northern Renaissance painting, just an oil painting, the rich colors, the vibrancy, the reflection you can get from the brass kettle hanging there. It's just awesome. And then last but not least, on the right-hand panel, you have Joseph, the future husband of the Virgin Mary. He is there in his carpentry space, his shop, that is open to the outside city, where he's selling mousetraps, and he is making mousetraps there in the center or in the shop. He's drilling holes in a bench or in a piece of wood, and you can't help but think of the crucifixion and the hammering of holes into Jesus's wrists and ankles as he's crucified. He is making mousetraps, which in Christianity, mousetrap is a symbol of Christ. Christ is the ultimate mousetrap. Basically, Christ and the cross is a symbol of the devil's mousetrap. It is Christ's presence, his crucifixion is what entraps and ensnares the devil and, of Satan. So that's a reference there. He's making all these mousetraps. But again, perspective totally off. That table where all his tools and the mousetrap is leaning towards you. So the tools would be falling off, but the artist wants to make sure you see everything. You see the nails on the table as a reference to the nails of the crucifixion. You see the wood and like the making of the cross, it being a reference to that, a reference to Christ as a carpenter. There's so much here that is symbolic and rich in association with Jesus and his purpose. And then again, I wanted to show you this close up so you could really see the city scene outside with the detail. And there's a mousetrap on a little kind of ledge where he's selling those mousetraps. So our piece, really this altar piece, the function and purpose of this is religious. And it is for, again, private worship for these patrons who you're seeing in, again, the left-hand panel. And I would say for formal quality color, very rich, bright, reflective colors because of the first use of oil painting here in the north. And then I would also say proportion, because the proportion of the objects, the figures, does not necessarily match the space that it is in. And again, we're emphasizing the symbols and stories versus the realism. And that's because the Northern Renaissance era is deeply, deeply inspired by its rich medieval history in both the architecture and the details you see within the piece, and also how the figures in the space is created and how it's utilized. All right, there you have it, the Annunciation Triptych, again done in the workshop of Robert Campen in the early 1400s. And again, it's an oil on wood piece.